settle.
Oh, I'm like, I thought there was one. Okay, I have a board feeling my mind. Good morning, everybody. Thank you for being here this morning. Welcome to the March 28th, 2004 Social Equity Working Group. It's great to see all your faces. I'm calling today's meeting to order at 9:34. Clerk, can you confirm that we have a quorum, please?
Good morning. We do have a quorum with 10 of 12 jurisdictions present.
Thank you so much. And I will just say that unfortunately, our chair had a medical emergency. She was planning on being here, but unfortunately she cannot be here today. So I will be chairing this morning's meeting. And before we go any further, I'd like to ask today's interpreter to introduce themselves and walk through how to access our interpretation services for our meeting today.
Announcer from interpreter. To use the interpretation feature, please scroll to the bottom of the Zoom screen where the meeting controls are. Click on the interpretation icon, this world, and select English as your language. If you are joining through the Zoom mobile app, cell phone, tablet, etc., please press the ellipsis, then interpretation, and then choose your language. Finally, click on mute original audio to not hear the original Spanish low in the background. Headsets are available for interpretation. If you are in the meeting room, please check out a headset from the receptionist in the lobby. Aviso por parte del intérprete. Para hacer uso del servicio de interpretación, favor de desplazarse a la parte inferior de la pantalla de Zoom, donde aparecen los controles. Haga clic en el icono de interpretación, globo terráqueo, y seleccione Spanish, español. Si está utilizando la aplicación móvil de Zoom, celular, tableta, etc., presione los puntos suspensivos, luego interpretación y luego el idioma. Si no desea escuchar el audio original en inglés en el fondo, por favor seleccione Mute Original Audio, silenciar audio original. Contamos con auriculares disponibles para el servicio de interpretación. Si se encuentra en la sala de reunión, favor de pedir auriculares con la recepcionista en el vestíbulo.
Gracias. Thank you. I'd like to take a moment now to acknowledge the land that we all call home. We acknowledge the harmony that existed between the land, nature, and its original peoples who have since endured displacement, persecution, and systemic oppression. We pay our respect to the unceded territory and homelands of the 18 tribal nations in our region, the most of any county in the United States. This land has nourished, protected, and embraced us all for many generations in a relationship of balance and harmony. As members of the SANDAG community, we acknowledge this legacy. We aspire to learn from Indigenous traditional knowledge and experiences in undoing the injustices of the past. Now we'll review the meeting process for both working group members as well as members of the public who wish to participate. For working group members, as you all already know, if you'd like to speak, please raise your hand. Make sure that you turn your mics on when you are talking. In front of everyone are iPads that should have today's agenda and all the materials. If you have any problems using them, just let somebody know. We can help. And clerk, before you provide us a quick reminder on how public comment works, I would like to ask that we keep our public comments to 1 minute, just so we can get through all the business on today's agenda.
And for public comments, we take those in person first. Please submit a speaker slip to me, and then we take those that are virtual second, and raise your hand before the end of each presentation that you would like to speak on. Thank you.
Thank you, Tessa. Do any members of the working group have any questions on the meeting procedures before we continue? Cool. Seeing none, let's move on to our first item. Public comments, member comments. Let's go ahead and start with public comments. Are there any public comments, clerk?
I have one public commenter, the original draw. Please go ahead.
Yeah, again, sad out of 3.3 million people. I'm the only one calling in, but you know, when you're talking about social equity and what's actually happening in the county with that, and the people that actually live here are being, you know, kind of discarded while the illegal immigrants are, you know, sitting here and getting a free ride. So there is no equity with our own communities when we are, you know, putting their needs above our own community's needs. There's homeless people, there are people that are struggling just to eat, and you know, there are veterans being, you know, displaced from, you know, the help going to these illegals, and it's just, there is no equity in that, and that's something that you guys should be very concerned about when you're talking about the community and wanting equity. You can't be, you know, we can't be having all of this services being provided to people who are committing crimes, crossing the border illegally, just to have a free ride while our community is suffering. There's definitely no equity in that.
And that concludes the public comments.
Thank you. And are there any comments, announcements from members of our working group this morning? Don't everybody raise your hand at once. Okay. I have one item that I would like to share. In the coming months, we are going to put together a work plan for this group. So really looking at how we can focus, what we can focus on for the remainder of the year. SANDAG is hoping to plan a workshop with some of the other working group members. So all the working groups are looking to do this. And then theoretically, you know, we would do this every year moving forward to have something of a guiding document for us, if you will. You all give us lots of really good feedback, and we still have that list that we reference in terms of like the topics that you want to hear about. So more to come on that, but just wanted to share that with you all this morning. And as soon as we have a date, of course, we'll send that out as well as other details. Okay, so now we'll move to item 2, which is approving our meeting minutes from the February 22nd Social Equity Working Group meeting. Do working group members have any comments or questions about the meeting minutes? Okay. Tessa, any comments from members of the public?
I have one public commenter, the original draw. Please go ahead.
Yeah, in the last meeting, you were, you know, defining equity, and it was really sad to see that you had 2 different definitions for the public and for the members of the board. And so when you guys are pushing equity, you're literally being inequitable and causing more division by doing that. Because you can't have 2 definitions depending on different groups. That in itself is inequitable. So, you know, it's just sad to see that a group that is based off of equity is actually being inequitable in their pursuits to bring equity. And your zero emissions vehicle incentives, that's something that coming down from the state, I mean, we don't even have any of the infrastructure that is needed to, you know, provide people with the, you know, means to get their vehicles charged. And we are also having things coming down from the state where we're not even supposed to be driving. So when you're incentivizing people to get into something that is eventually going to go away anyway, because we're supposed to be getting it out of our cars, you know, you're not, it's not smart to go down that path.
And that concludes the public comments on consent.
Thank you, Tessa. As a reminder, you don't have to have been present at February's meeting in order to vote on this item. May I please have a motion to approve? I have a motion by Carol, second by Barry. Thank you. Those in favor, please raise your hand. I see all hands raised. The motion passes unanimously. Sorry. Were you supposed to do that, Justin? Moving on to agenda item number 3, we have the proposed selection criteria for the Special Transportation Grant Program and its Cycle 13 call for projects. As a reminder, Zach Rivera and Ali Vasquez were here a couple months ago, so we are happy to welcome them back.
Good morning, everyone. Good morning, members of the Social Equity Working Group. My name is Ali Vasquez, and I serve as one of the program managers for the SANDAG Specialized Transportation Grant Program, or STGP, alongside with my colleague, Zach Rivera. And I mainly focus on the monitoring of active STGP grants, and then Zach, he helps to shepherd the competitive process for grants. As you may recall, we presented to you in November, and during that November meeting, we discussed the specialized transportation needs of the entire region and the program goal. We are returning to you today to provide a recap on the feedback we've heard so far and seek your input on the criteria used for the Cycle 13 call for projects. And we're also going to discuss next steps. So here's a recap of the program. Funding from the SCGP comes from the Federal Transit Administration Section 5310 program, as well as the Transnet Senior Mini Grant Program. The SCGP funds a broad range of specialized transportation services for older adults and individuals with disabilities. Our program goal is to improve mobility for older adults and individuals with disabilities by delivering effective, equitable, environmentally responsible, and coordinated transportation solutions in our region. The eligible applicants for the program are nonprofit organizations, local governmental agencies, including local jurisdictions. Eligible grant types through the program are capital grants, such as accessible vehicle purchases, mobility management grants, such as travel training and operating grants, and that could be something like volunteer driver programs. The SCGP seeks to complement fixed route public transit service to strengthen our region's specialized transportation network. So some of your organizations represented here on this committee may be eligible for the program. So last November, we not only presented to you, but we also engaged with the San Diego County Volunteer Driver Coalition, as well as the SANDAG Mobility Working Group and the Council on Access and Mobility, and the Age Well San Diego Transportation Team and the SANDAG Social Services Transportation Advisory Council. We also reached out to stakeholders through email, social media, and our webpage. And through these efforts and our kickoff workshop held in early October, we received over 100 comments so far. So when we reached out to the Social Equity Working Group the first time, members of the committee suggested a few things. They said to look at who we funded before. They said to, you said to conduct outreach with the San Diego Regional Center and student groups, and also increase our technical assistance for applicants. And it was also mentioned that we should be reaching out to people who speak different languages. And here are some five themes that on the region's specialized transportation needs that emerged. There was availability such as expanded hours and service areas. Also, another theme that emerged was folks wanted flexibility such as on-demand services, as well as service quality, coordination among providers, and affordability was important to them as well. We also asked what, if anything, should be changed to improve the goal of the program. And while some changes, some thought no changes were needed, actually, others suggested references to dependability, affordability, and the on-demand service, as mentioned. A summary of all of the stakeholder engagement is on the SCGP webpage if you're interested.
Thank you, Ali. So additionally, since we presented to you in November, I conducted a literature review and benchmarking analysis where I identified 8 comparable regions and compared their Section 5310 evaluation criteria with SANDAGs. The analysis revealed that the themes of the SDGP criteria used last cycle are consistent with the 8 other regions studied. The full literature review and benchmarking analysis is available on the SCGP webpage. You might be wondering what criteria was used last cycle. The cycle 12 criteria are available on the SDGP webpage and are also included as attachment 1 of the staff report, starting on page 11 of your agenda packet. Overall, there were 8 criteria categories for a total of 100 possible points, but let me spend a few minutes describing each one. So first, there was applicant capacity and experience. This evaluated whether applicants had experience in successfully managing grants and transportation-related projects for older adults and individuals with disabilities. It also looked at the financial stability and capacity of applicants. Second was operation/implementation plan. This measured the level of detail applicants used to describe how they would provide effective service. Next was stewardship of public funds and assets. And for applicants not applying for vehicle funding, this evaluated whether only necessary and reasonable costs were proposed and if sufficient matching funds had been secured. Applicants with vehicle and other equipment projects were evaluated on how well they would use these assets over the grant term, how robust their procedures were to safeguard those assets, and the level of matching funds committed to the project. And fourth was need and equity. This evaluated whether the service would indeed aid older adults and individuals with disabilities and their specialized transportation needs. It also looked at how the service would benefit those that need it the most, including historically underserved populations. The 5th category was coordination, which addressed how applicants would coordinate with other agencies to address service gaps, avoid duplication, and enhance service delivery. The 6th category was environmental responsibility, which evaluated how the service would promote healthier air and reduce greenhouse gas emissions. Next was proposed performance, which varied by grant type, but included measures such as number of hours of service and cost per one-way passenger trip. And finally, last but not least, was performance monitoring, reporting, and outcomes, which evaluated how awarded applicants would monitor the service, track client data, measure outcomes, and demonstrate impact. So with all this context in mind, I would like to pause in the middle of the presentation and kind of open it up to you for your thoughts and ideas. To guide the discussion, we have 3 questions for you to consider. Do you think the criteria used last cycle, the ones I just shared, help us identify which projects and programs should receive funding? Of the criteria used last cycle, what do you think are the most important? What do you think are the least important? And broadly speaking, what other criteria should we be considering? So again, the criteria that I just went over are included in attachment 1 of your staff report. And I'll stop talking and open it up to you all for your feedback. And then I'll continue on to next steps after the discussion. Certainly.
Thoughts or Claire?
Thanks for the update on this project. As the social equity working group, I think that, need and equity is really paramount in terms of priority, as well as environmental responsibility. And, in thinking about both of these, I would also think about location. Are we focusing our dollars in communities that have been historically underfunded? And so I'm not sure if that's in these priorities, but maybe that can be something that's added in here.
Thank you.
Absolutely agree with what was said. This is an equity group, and part of the equity is to provide services where there aren't any, is part of it. And so I think that needs to be elevated. I don't like the applicant capacity and experience, because a lot of communities don't have the capacity and they really need it, right? And nor the experience. I would like to see that selection criteria put number 4, either 1 or 2, need and equity. Yeah, the rest is arguable, but I think that that one needs to be elevated.
Thanks.
Other? Marjana?
So again, thank you for being here and for presenting this. I think when I go to need and equity and what I see, I only see kind of 2 subsets. And I know that you said that you had comments before about like inclusivity of language, like in the service provision and cost and like reducing cost. So I would probably want to see those as subsets. I won't want to see those listed as priorities in the cost proposal that you're putting out and the RFP you're putting out, if that's the case, so that people know that that is a priority for you as well. Because I think that's huge for our community in terms of if you're investing in a project, making sure that the community is going to be able to utilize the service, which for a lot of our communities, that means that they would feel safe communicating, they would feel safe, and that they can affordability, right? So when you're looking at, especially with our elderly, like that sometimes they have a lot of fixed income. So, and likewise, if we're doing that they also have a recruitment strategy or a marketing strategy that's like kind of inclusive, so that they have some sort of partnerships with, low-income housing for elderly or something, that they're able to promote to the targeted population, and that they have that at the forefront. So to make sure that we're able to kind of maximize utility and usage. That would be my comment.
Thank you.
Belen, yeah.
I have a question. So how do you assess their reach? For instance, I'm thinking perhaps some of the CBOs or jurisdictions applying want to use the funds for programs that they're already running with the base that they are already serving, which is good. But also, how do we make sure we're reaching more people, right? Because I don't know how large you estimate the population that needs to be served, how large it is, versus how much the program is currently reaching.
Yeah, great question. So one of the things that we're going to be starting this fiscal year is a specialized transportation needs assessment. And what that will do is tell us how many older adults and individuals with disabilities need specialized transportation, where they are, and where they need to go. We don't have that data right now, and it's a huge data gap. So we're looking to compile that data, and that data will then help inform the criteria. It won't help to inform the cycle 13 criteria, but it definitely will help to inform future cycles. And we can then layer that with what our current grantees are doing and see, kind of analyze the data a little bit more. So that information is forthcoming.
That's excellent. Yeah, I think that would help address what I'm trying to hit at.
Yep.
And then just as a follow-up, I think last time we asked about working with the San Diego Regional Center or just those who already have access to the population we need to serve. So is that something you're incorporating somehow?
Yeah, so we definitely are reaching out to lots of different stakeholders, regional centers, school districts, especially when it comes time to when the call is released. We definitely will reach out to all eligible applicants, including those that you mentioned. And, you know, coordination is one of the criteria here, and that's looking at how eligible applicants will coordinate with one another. And that could be regional center, it could be school districts for
perfect.
those that are disabled, for example.
Yeah, the schools is a great access point as well, especially for students with disabilities. Thank you.
Carol? I'm so glad you're collecting that data. I think that's not overdue. So thank you for that very much. Language, is always a concern for Alcohol. And so I wanted to bring this up because so many of the programs that we have for transportation out there for our seniors, there's a long application process for it. And they can't manage the applications because there isn't enough translation services when they call. And it's challenging for them, so they just give up. And that's always been a big concern. So we really don't have any great programs in El Cajon for transportation, and the programs that are available. I'm thinking on the go with the county, there just isn't the translation available for them to complete the application. And so I'd like to see that that's corrected in some of these other projects.
No, it was mentioned I think Carol brought it up at the last meeting, and we definitely heard about the needs for interpretation services. And that's something that we're definitely considering for the upcoming criteria.
Sure. That's easily fixable, right? And so let us know if we can help you with this, because I think that that's like a really reasonable request. And I think this is not the first time I think Carol mentioned that. So.
One of the ideas that's going around in my head on the interpretation, if it's difficult for people to fill out the application, because it's frustrating because applications are hard to do anyway, and then to not have the language, would someone putting in a proposal be able to subcontract to, say, an organization to actually assist people in filling out the application? So that might be something you want to allow in an overall applicant's application. Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, I just wanted to add to, interpretation isn't something, SANDAG can provide for these agencies for their internal program stuff. So if we were to add something like this, it would be some sort of language that states that we would like, it would be an evaluation criteria that perhaps allocates more points for an agency that is subcontracting for this type of service. So that's something we can do. Yeah.
Subcontracting or otherwise providing that critical service.
Excuse the question. Before I mention it, is there any funding available to help us get translators in this through SANDAG?
It could be part of the SDGP if it's related to the SDGP program, like a service funded through the SDG program. But outside of that, I would have to defer to others at the agency. I don't know.
What agency would you defer to?
I guess what I'm saying is if there are eligible applicants that wanted to include interpretation as part of their proposal, that could be definitely a part of their service. but what other agencies or other supports, I'm not sure.
Sorry, and then just now that we're talking about prioritizing selection criteria, maybe accessibility in general, in terms of the application, not just language, but also, I mean, everything that you would see, I think even the county do for like our elderly, so larger font, like even being able to specify some of those things in the, I don't know if it's going to be an RFP, but you know, in that proposal so that it highlights that we are really trying to cater to those specialized populations. That'd be great.
Yeah, and I will say that a lot of our current grantees already do some of that effort just as a practical matter, trying to, you know, really meet the needs of, say, older adults or individuals with disabilities. So, but we will encourage that.
Yeah, my only concern is I know that looking at this historically, this grant program, that a lot of agencies are continually funded over the years, and that it's a lot of the same programs. So I get a little concerned when I see applicant capacity because I really don't feel like there's any way to build capacity knowing that this program is going to continue for many years with new programs. And so when you see applicant capacity and experience as number one, right away, if you're a new program, I think I would be a little intimidated by that because really isn't any capacity building to develop a program. So.
Thanks.
Any other comments from our members?
This proposed performance.
Yeah, so that has to do with performance measures. So it really varies. Like I said, it varies by grant type. Like if you had a volunteer driver program, for example, one of the classic measures that we have is cost per one-way passenger trip. So the cost it takes to provide the service versus the number of trips that you are providing in a given time period. And that's something that you know, an applicant can propose what their one-way passenger trip is, and then over the grant term, what their actual one is, and we compare those and try to hold them accountable to what they propose. We'll say that as you can imagine, during COVID, the numbers and the data went all over the place. So this is something that post-COVID, we're trying to get back to a place where we're going to hold people accountable to their cost per one-way passenger trips, but it is difficult. We realize that it's difficult, especially with inflation and other driver shortages and other issues. So that's one measure that we use.
Okay.
So I'm sorry, just a clarifying question on that, because I see that there's scales here, and I see that the less cost for the one-way passenger trip, the more points you get. So does that, I guess my question is, does that then incentivize if you already have existing infrastructure to support, wouldn't your cost be lower? So then does it kind of incentivize, like you already have an infrastructure, you maybe already have matching, you have an existing program. So then does that then, and maybe I just don't understand it, but would that then dissuade like somebody else that's trying to build that infrastructure and those services?
Sort of. I mean, I think you're right in terms of the structure, the cost per one-way passenger trips and the points, where if you have a lower cost per one-way passenger trip, you would get more points. That's how the criteria is structured. In terms of, you know, dissuading new applicants, you know, it really depends on the new applicant. They could have a program that's fully fleshed out through funding, not through the SDGP. We encourage that. And then if they apply for grant funds, then they're ready to go with this program. What we're looking at is overall performance. And when programs start, they can deliver service to older adults and individuals with disabilities as effectively as possible.
I have a thought. It's not fully formed, but you know, the electric vehicle incentive program is kind of underway, and there's outreach happening right now to figure out, you know, how do we get infrastructure into communities that don't have infrastructure. And so I'm just curious if there's a way to kind of connect these programs in a way so that maybe communities where, you know, when we're looking at the cost per ride, if we're looking to bring electric vehicles as the form of transportation, but there's no infrastructure, if that incentive program could come in to support the infrastructure to then reduce that barrier kind of for an organization that's trying to, you know, trying to access this program. So just kind of curious if we're, you know, if the different programs that are going on are kind of cross-pollinating, and are there opportunities to, you know, kind of streamline how funding is coming in to support the different parts of projects?
Yeah, great question. And yeah, so we're through the SDGP, and this is going to be new for cycle 13, is we're funding electric vehicles. So one of the things with the SDGP is we use a consortium called the CalAct Consortium, and that is throughout the state of California, the California Association of Coordinated Transportation. And we use this cooperative to buy accessible vehicles because it ensures that they're cost competitive and federally compliant. There's a lot of requirements, as you might imagine, with procuring accessible vehicles at the federal level. And so the cooperative helps with that. And the cooperative is now introducing electric vehicle models, and those models will be available through the Cycle 13 call. Those vehicles, it's generally about twice as expensive and about half the range as ICE-powered vehicles. But we encourage people to apply for electric vehicles because as the criteria environmental responsibility, it would promote the reduction of greenhouse gas emissions. And we've heard from operators that sometimes it is beneficial for operational efficiency to have electric vehicles. So we're definitely having that. And then in terms of cross-pollination, as you were mentioning, we're definitely going to be reaching out to folks on our team to see about other grant opportunities that can help applicants with the charging infrastructure that goes along with that. So there's definitely opportunities there.
I'd like to add, just from my monitoring perspective, something that we did that is active for the previous cycle, cycle 12, is now we are asking grantees to help us out with letting us know the zip codes that they serve. And that's data that I'm going to give to regional planning to help them with charging infrastructure grants so that we could know, okay, what areas are our specialized transportation grantees serving, in the hopes that we can prioritize infrastructure in those areas.
I have way too much time on my hands. So I preface that by saying we've looked at this at UCP for a while as, and when I say this, I mean different programs and how they're implemented. Maybe this is for SANDAG in general, is the thought is to include not necessarily communities, but loosely defined as regions. And I'll give you an example. Most of the communities south of 94, all the way down to the border, have the same disabilities, they have the same disparities, they have the same population, they have the same demographics. I mean, it's just one large region. I look and see in a variety of different agencies the projects, but I don't see the big impact. I see a whole lot of little improvements, But when I look back in general, and correct me if I'm wrong, you guys, when we look south of there's not a big impact. We've been doing this for 10, 15, 20 years, and yet I don't see that, bam, wow, that's going to help out. And so thinking that a little deeper, if we can maybe look at different projects in the future from a regional standpoint, those communities that are contiguous, right? Those communities that have the same disparities, maybe we can look at funding grants on more of a regional level and include like the TCC grant, perfect example. They encourage collaboration along these corridors and these regions. And that does, I think that's a marvelous model to use because that forces us to work together. We're all focused on the same areas and it's in a bigger swath of areas, right? It's a larger area, which would mean it would have a bigger impact. So in your planning of providing these grants down the road, if we could sort of broaden that coalition that you are funding, it might help with the impact in the communities to improve transportation, walkability. Does that make sense? You see where I'm going with this?
Yeah, and I think what I was mentioning earlier about the needs assessment will really help to provide that data that we need to inform that discussion. And I think we'd be happy to bring that back when the data is there.
Please, I think that would be better. You know, my thinking is keep doing the same things, get the same results. We haven't had many results. So I'm thinking let's switch it. I mean, impactful, not specific projects, but I'm just looking at impact is what I'm looking at.
Any other comments? Okay, well, there'll be one more opportunity. We'll let Zach and Allie continue.
All right. Well, again, I really appreciate the robust discussion, lots of great feedback. We'll definitely take it into consideration as we develop the call. In terms of next steps, from now through April, we plan to gather more input from SANDAG working groups and other stakeholder groups on the criteria. With all this feedback, we anticipate presenting to the Independent Taxpayer Oversight Committee at its May 8th meeting, and the Transportation Committee at its May 17th meeting. Depending on the outcomes of those meetings, we plan to present to the SANDAG board in May or June, teeing up the release of the Cycle 13 call on July 1st, which would then open up a 90-day application window. And then once the application window closes and we receive submitted applications, we review them to ensure they meet our eligibility requirements. Then we forward eligible applications to evaluators to score. Following that, funding recommendations are developed. This phase of the process is expected to be from October through February. And then March of 2025 is when we anticipate the SANDAG board would consider approval of the funding recommendations. And pending board approval, the awarded Cycle 13 senior mini grants could begin July 1st, 2025, and awarded Section 5310 grants could start October 1st of 2025. So it's a long process, but it's definitely there to make sure we have a good process to allocate these funds. And I'm sure it's not new to many of you that have done grant work or RFPs. So I'll turn it over to Allie.
So to wrap up our presentation, we just want to thank you all for your phenomenal feedback, and we encourage you to visit our SCGP webpage at sandag.org/SCGP and to view our Cycle 13 updates, as well as to subscribe to our email distribution list. And we also encourage you to, if you have any more comments that you weren't able to let us know about today, you can always email us at grantsdistribution@sandag.org. And you can ask us questions there as well. So with that, I'll turn it over back to you all, and we can move forward. Thank you.
Thank you both. So there was quite a bit of discussion. We'll see if we have any public comments on this item.
Thank you. We have two public comments on this item. First, the original draw, please go ahead.
Yeah, I don't understand the whole people thinking there's operational efficiency when you're using electric vehicles when they get half the range and they're twice as expensive, and there is no infrastructure to be charging these. And even if you are going to be charging it, it's going to take a very long time. It's not like you're just going and getting gas, and if something happens and you run out of battery, you can't just go get a gallon of gas. You got to have somebody come and mitigate that for you. And the EVs pollute more than regular gas cars. So, we need to be like honest with what's really happening. It's not environmentally responsible. But it's interesting that you don't even have a needs assessment, and you put the cart before the horse when you don't even know what the needs are for a program, and then you're implementing it, and then you go in later and try and figure it out. Because if also you're at capacity and things like that for applications and it needs to be expanded, you need to be making sure that you're reaching as many people as possible. And, yeah.
Your time expired. Our next and final commenter, Jean Durgan, please go ahead. You are self-muted.
Thank you. I'm Jean Durgan from the Peninsula Shepherd Center, and I appreciate everything SANDAG does. I just had a question about the equity. The Shepherd Center is a very small organization that only does zip codes 92106, 7, and part of 10, and has been doing the senior mini grants for many, many years. But the equity, we don't have a diverse equity, but we do have a lot of seniors in our area that need transportation, and we have 3 vans that go out every day, and as well as volunteer drivers. So that's my comment about the equity. Not race, but older adults, and that are living on a fixed income in their own homes and want to stay that way and need transportation. Thank you so very much.
And that concludes the public comments on this item.
Thank you. And I did want to open up one more time if the members had any additional comments. Okay, I think we're good. Thank you so much, Zach and Allie. Okay, moving on to our next item, the draft fiscal year 2025 program budget is going to be presented by Susan Huntington from SANDAG.
I was going to present with Julian, Great. So I'm Susan Huntington. I'm the Director of Financial Planning, Budgets, and Grants here at SANDAG. Last year, we presented our draft FY24 budget to this body, and we got a lot of good feedback, a lot of good comments. We wanted to make sure that we came back again this year to talk to you about what is in our work plan and what is in our budget for the year ahead of us, FY25. So very excited to be here with you today. Our budget is a $1.3 billion budget for FY25. The budget encapsulates 3 separate components. It's our overall work program, which is our inventory of regional planning projects and programs, our data science, our stakeholder outreach efforts. We also have regional ops and services. This component of the budget provides for the management and ongoing operations of the toll roads, SR 125, I-15 Fast Track, and other customer customer services that we deliver throughout the region. And we also have capital projects. These are the major infrastructure projects that you see throughout the region. This is the largest component of our budget. Our budget is not just a tool for what we use in terms of revenue, but in terms of like implementing our own projects, but our revenue that we pass through to the local jurisdictions, the county, and our transit operators allows them to put forward their own projects and do maintenance and transit operations. So it's very important also for funding out in the community. So process-wise, the draft budget, we've been working on the draft budget since late last year. In terms of the process, we bring the draft budget to the board in the March timeframe. We brought it to the board and it was approved by the board last Friday. After that, we make sure that we are sharing the draft budget with stakeholders, including our funding agencies. They have to approve our budget in order for us to begin to spend their money, their allocation, beginning July 1st. So at this point, we have pushed our budget over to our funding agencies so they can begin to review our budget. We're here today to present to you. We've also posted the budget online and are doing other outreach to stakeholders. We're taking input up until probably the middle of next month, which is fast approaching. And then we'll be bringing back the final budget to the board for their approval the second week of May. At that point, we turn around and we push the final budget back to our funding agencies. They do a quick review again to see what's changed between draft and final, hopefully giving us their approval so we can begin to spend money on July 1st. So this is all part of our process. It's very well orchestrated. So I will now kind of giving you this overview of why we're here and what we're here to do. I'm just here to share the programs and projects that are included in our budget. And then we can have some discussion about that, or I can answer any questions you may have. So jumping right into it, as you know, SANDAG has a number of different mandates, responsibilities. Many of these are related to the long-term regional planning. As you're well aware, we must also adopt an annual overall budget. And there's different mandates. All of the projects and programs that we're doing are related to our overall responsibilities, authority, and mandates. So in terms of the overall budget, like I said, it's a $1.3 billion budget. If you, in your agenda packet today, there's a link online to the overall budget. And I would just point you in the direction of Chapter 1. Chapter 1 is really a guide, an overview of the work that we're doing. And it's more of like the reader-friendly version versus the kind of detailed numbers-focused. So I would direct you to Chapter 1 of our budget. Also, on page 26 in particular, this year we included kind of like a guide map of how to read the budget. So each of the projects has what we call a work element. It describes the project, it describes our focus in FY25. It tells you how much money is allocated to that project and where the funding is coming from. So if you take a look at page 26, it's going to help you understand how to read the budget, and all of Chapter 1 is kind of that overview, overarching work program. Collaboration and transparency are really key to us. So the more you know what's in our budget, the more that we can work with you, and it's very clear the direction that we're going in the next year and how we're spending our funding, the Transnet, local funding, as well as state and federal funds. So the proposed budget is a $1.3 billion budget. You can see that almost half of that is going towards our multi-year capital projects. We also, heading kind of counterclockwise, those three pink pieces, that's the Transnet revenue that comes in on an annual basis. So for FY25, we are estimating roughly $458 million is coming through the half-cent sales tax. 177 million of that goes to our multi-year capital program, as well as towards debt for prior financings for the major corridor program. This Transnet pass-through piece, 240 million, that's the piece that I talked about that goes to the local jurisdictions for their local streets and roads program, as well as the funding that's going to our transit operators. So that's just passed through straight to them for their use. Other Transnet, that little piece down at the bottom, that's our administration of the Transnet program, the entire program, as well as money going towards our regional bike program. That's an off the top that's dedicated specifically to regional bikeway capital projects. Regional ops and services, roughly 6% of the budget. Our overall work program, like I said, those are our major planning projects that you're probably most familiar with. That's 9% of the budget. And then the board, they have a budget of roughly $768,000 for their purposes. If you take out that pass-through line that goes to the local jurisdictions and the transit operators, roughly what you have left is $850 million. And that funds the SANDAG implementation, planning, and programs. So the funding that supports that, you can see, is over 3/4 federal and state. So this really comes into how we use the money has to be very particular, and we have to abide by all the state and federal regulations. Transnet makes up roughly 17% of the revenue that supports our internal projects. Again, we'd like to talk about how Transnet leverages these other outside funds. Transnet is a very important piece of the revenue that supports our program, 17%. And then we also have other local funds. These are member assessment, toll road revenues, and other local revenues that come to SANDAG. So for each of the different components that we have talked about, I'm going to kind of give you a financial summary. So our overall work program, again, this is regional planning, data and modeling services, and our stakeholder and community engagement. This is Chapter 2 of our budget. So the financial summary is what you're looking at here. So in the bottom, that kind of purple piece that shows you where we're at, right? We're only 9% of the overall budget is for our work program. If going to the right under expenses, you'll see project direct, admin, indirect, and direct personnel. So 75% again is for our work and the work that our partners like Caltrans, NCTD, MTS, and local jurisdictions, if we're working on together, this is for us, our consultants as well. And then we pass through some funds from our OWP to the local jurisdictions and other grantees. Our revenue, sticking with that same, over 75% of the revenue is federal and state funded. Kind of up at the top, I want to explain this dollar change between what was in our FY24 budget and what's being proposed for our FY25 budget. You may recall that in the fall of last year, our board of directors approved a major budget amendment in FY24. And this bump up here of $16 million, that is just continuing to implement what the board had approved last October, and that's South County Rail Transit Planning, Next Gen Rapid for the 625 Advanced Planning, Purple Line Alternatives Analysis were all approved last year, as well as another year of funding for the Youth Opportunity Pass and additional funding for our Flexible Fleets program. We've also added one additional project into the OWP this year, 1.7 million. We received 1.7 million for the Regional Infrastructure Incubator Project. This was funded through a successful federal grant awarded by the the Build America Bureau. So we went out and we asked for some money and we got it for launching a project that's intended to support early implementation of some of the projects in the regional plan by looking at alternative delivery methods, CMGC or design build, other kind of innovative and unique project delivery methods so that those projects could be advanced even sooner. So some of the major work efforts that I would point out that are also included in the overall work program. I mentioned the flexible fleets. Someone earlier mentioned our efforts to do the regional electric vehicle charger incentive program, the youth opportunity pass. We're doing a lot of bus rapid planning and implementation projects, our South County Rapid project, San Ysidro Mobility Hub, and then we were recently awarded both a grant for reconnecting communities. And so that project will be added into the final budget. So moving on to our regional ops and services. This component of the budget, like I said, it provides the management of our ongoing operational programs and customer services. Examples of this work include the SR 125 toll road, our freeway service patrol, the SANDAG van pool program, and the automated regional justice information service. This is in Chapter 3 of our budget. We do have an increase between our current approved budget and what's being proposed for next year. We have seen cost increases in our motorist aid services. So those are the vehicles that you might see out on the freeway. That's aimed at reducing freeway congestion along the road. And then so there was a cost increase in providing that service, as well as there's a cost increase in our transportation demand management program that provides commuter programs and services that promote transportation alternatives to driving alone, as well as the ARGIS program, that's the Automated Regional Justice Information System. We are continuing to invest in the I-15 fast track. So we've added $2 million next year for the implementation of upgraded transponders on all vehicles utilizing the expressway. And we also are investing in the back office toll system on the 125 for the facilities operations. So we're continuing to invest in upgrading our toll facilities and looking for efficiencies and process improvements. So that kind of, and then we jump into the capital budget. Again, this is the largest component of the SANDAG program budget. If you flip to Chapter 5, you'll see that the structure of these projects is a little bit different. These are multi-year projects. So these projects, this is the budget for our large capital projects. And as you know, that takes a long time to plan and implement. So the budgets go out to 2033. And we update the budgets based on the project progress. Projects that are beginning construction or proposed to begin construction next year. We have 3 projects on the rail line, the coastal rail line. So the Bataquitos Lagoon double track, the San Dieguito Lagoon double track, and the San Onofre de Pulgas double track will all begin construction next year, as well as 3 critical bike projects, Eastern Hillcrest Bikeway, University Bikeway, and the Washington Street and Mission Valley Bikeways. So those are some big projects that are due to begin construction. We have 3 projects that will be opening for use. One of those is the SR 56 HOV lane project is estimated to be open during the year. And then our new 125 I-15 regional tolling back office systems will go live at the end of the calendar year. So what I talked about in the beginning is kind of like the schedule. We're here today to get any sort of feedback that you might have on the projects and programs, or perhaps you just want to learn a little bit more about the projects that we have in the work plan for next year. We're going to be doing some updates and presenting the final budget to our board of directors May the 10th. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Susan. Comments or questions from members of this working group? Yeah, Barry.
So our areas of concern are in southeastern San Diego, and I want to remind everyone that we've had some major infrastructure issues with the recent floods that we've had. And I would like some, if at all possible, consideration to be given on the programs and budgets that are scheduled for the next couple of years. I'm not sure what SANDAG's role is, but when I hear SANDAG, I hear infrastructure. What we've experienced in this flood, there's some maps floating around that says the majority, there's 24 flood impacted communities in San Diego. You guys, 95% of them are under 94, Highway 94. That's a symptom, that ain't the problem. So what I read in this kind of data is that, and we all know it, and it's not going to be fixed overnight, but there's a consistent practice of disinvestment. When I see stuff like this screams at me. When I don't see any blue or any flood impacted communities that are north of 94. These are the kind of things that frustrates me, but primarily, is it really equitable? When we look at this stuff, and if we're really, really, really considering equity as a major factor in planning projects and improving our community, then I see this. And it's like, you guys, what's even more frustrating is it's like business as usual. If we don't stay in the press, if we don't in the community and stay loud, this will just drift off. So I would like at some point in time to look at this and say, what is causing this? And it starts with the budget. So I don't have any answers. I'm telling you that this is brewing up, and I get frustrated because these are symptoms of lack of disinvestment. Comments, questions, help?
You may have some response too, Susan, but what I can say is, Barry, we provide the local agencies with funding through Transnet for local streets and roads that could absolutely be used to do this type of work. We don't have a dedicated funding source to do the work that you're talking about, but we have an incredible grants team under Susan's shop that is always looking at not just grant opportunities for SANDAG, but also all of our partners. And so this is definitely something that I think is on our radar and that we can be looking for, supporting, helping to bring more resources into the region to address those issues. You also know we got the Reconnecting Communities grant. I think that's an example of us working with the communities, working with the cities. This Choyas Creek area is one example of an area that we'll be collaboratively working on using that funding to address some of those issues. So you won't see that in the grant yet because we don't actually know exactly how much money we're getting from Caltrans yet, and we don't have an executed grant agreement. We just know that we were one of the successful recipients of that funding program. So that'll be amended into the budget at a later date. There are a lot of programs, though, that are Southeast San Diego in the budget, planning work and capital projects in the works. You know, we've got the microtransit project in there.
Absolutely.
Super excited to get that project going.
And this is an emergency. I mean, this is not anything planned.
Yeah.
So I just want to make sure that that stays on the menu.
The challenge for us with emergencies like that is we don't have a lot of discretionary money. Our money is dedicated to very specific things. So we don't have like a pot of reserve money that we can use to support emergencies like this very easily.
But what can happen is that if you know of any funding through the feds or through something like that, maybe that effort can be say, we can use this money for that.
Yeah, and
Since
that's
you're
what we're
so
doing.
close to it.
Absolutely. That was going to be my one comment, is that the chair of SANDAG, Supervisor Vargas, has definitely taxed us with that, to be looking for grant opportunities. And maybe they aren't something that SANDAG would apply for, but certainly on the lookout for what other opportunities exist for our local jurisdictions, and to be partnering all of us together for these emergency requirements.
I wanted to chime in as well, because I know, Barry, you've brought up several times the grant piece and sort of like the collaboration. And there was the Maddie opportunity, which I think may still be available. That was I don't know that one was for emergency services, but just another example of like, we are looking for these, even, for example, that one wasn't necessarily a SANDAG one, but could have been one that CBOs worked together on to, apply for larger kind of areas. Yep. Kathy.
That's all wonderful, but I think one of the things that maybe for SANDAG as a whole to think about is that prioritizing investment in disinvested communities. I run an agency that's much smaller than SANDAG, but you only have a number of people to write grants and a limited time. And so to prioritize the budget, the work that grants people are working on, that everyone always thinks of the disinvested communities first, so we don't have what we have today. So looking at it in that way, and obviously that would have to go to the board, but I think if the organization as a whole, that was one of the values, I'm looking at the mission up there, is one of the values that we prioritize our disinvested communities.
Other thoughts or questions for Susan?
I'm wondering if you can actually share a little bit more about some of the projects that are happening in our kind of South Bay, Southeast San Diego communities. I was just looking at the beginning capital projects and noticed that none of those were in our community. So I'm curious what is in the works. I imagine it's in the budget. So when we have time to dive in, we'll see that. But if you could share kind of high level.
There's a lot going on in South County, actually. So some of it you won't see in the CIP, you'll see it in the planning. It doesn't really move over to the CIP until we're nearing the construction phase. So we have the Purple Line planning. We're completing the conceptual planning for that first segment from National City on up to Kearney Mesa, Sorrento Mesa, and moving into alternatives analysis and trying to get that project ready for environmental. We have the Blue Line Express, so looking at how we improve Blue Line, add capacity, speed it up. We have San Ysidro Mobility Hub, which is kind of a two-part project. So the initial track relocation and then the connections and improvements to mobility overall around that transit center. We have multiple flexible fleet pilot projects that are serving South County. While we're planning the two rail, the Blue Line and the Purple, we'll be implementing an interim rapid so that the communities don't have to wait for, rail projects take a long time to build. So there's going to be sort of a Purple Line rapid and a Blue Line Express rapid that will be implemented within probably the next 5 years. Those are much easier to get off the ground. There's also a study looking at extending the coaster down to the border. That's in the state's rail plan. So we're taking the lead on then extending coaster service all the way on down to San Ysidro port of entry. I'm sure I'm missing some of the bikeway projects.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yeah. Let me hop in on some of the capital projects, and what I can do, what we included for the board last week, which I don't think was in your agenda packet, is a map of all of the capital projects. And so I'll share that with Paula so that she can send it out to the group so you can see. But that's what I'm looking at in front of me today. Right, so we have the Bayshore Bikeway in Barrio Logan. That's in our budget. We have a downtown to Imperial Bikeway that's in there. We also have improvements along Harbor Drive. It's the project is at Vesta Street Bridge. We have the Blue Line Railway signal improvements and I-805 South Soundwalls project, Palomar Street rail grade separation, and border to Bayshore bikeway projects. Also, of course, SR 11 and Otay Mesa East Port of Entry is in South County. So those kind of Bayshore Bikeway, Barrio Logan Phase 2, we have a number of things that are going on in South County. I'll share the map with Paula and so she can send that out to you.
I think a map would be awesome. And
Yeah.
of course, we know there's things happening, but it's helpful to, you know, to see where our communities are, you know, coming in and being.
Absolutely.
prioritized.
Yeah. Well, I'll be glad to share that.
I just want to say thank you for including the Youth Opportunity Pass and the Purple Line and the San Ysidro Mobility Hub. And there's a lot of great projects in this work plan. The ones I just listed is because Jesse, I, and you know, a few other organizations have identified these as part of the 10 transit lifelines that we think would have a good sense of impact on equity communities. But overall, thank you, because I know you put a lot of work into it.
Anyone else? Claire.
I have a very specific question. I noticed there's a criminal justice line item. Can you share a little bit more about what that is for?
We do a lot of data and research on crime in the county, and we put out publications. So you'll probably see news articles that go out about some of the research and data that we've done. And criminal justice has been a part of SANDAG's work program for
Decades.
Yeah, many decades. It's primarily a grant-funded
Right.
program. And we can have somebody come and talk about that. Dr. Cindy Burt can come and talk more about that program at a future meeting, because neither one of us are really the experts on that. But
Right. So they do a lot of research, data analysis. They go into the jails and they're doing surveys and then providing updates and reports that we post on our website. But like Antoinette mentioned, all of this is pretty much grant funded. So they go out, they get grants to do this type of work. And then we have researchers that are doing the work and putting the reports together, talking about crime in the region.
Cool, thank you. I think it'd be great to have her come out and share. It's definitely an equity issue. And so I'm curious how this group can support. Thanks.
I got a question, just a guidance question. If we wanted some improvements along the Choyas Creek area where most of the flooding was done, like down the road, I know we have plans of submitting improvement suggestions with the community plan update that's coming up. But should we send something to you guys outlining what we are suggesting or how, or I guess guidance in how to get those improvements identified, planned, and funded?
well, you're talking to the right folks at the city, Barry, because I think, you know, we don't have,
Right.
you know, sort of jurisdiction over local land, local streets and roads, but we do provide the local streets and roads funding
Right.
to cities, like I mentioned before. So there's an opportunity for them to prioritize some of that funding to be able to make those improvements. You can certainly always, you know, share with us. We're in communication with the city a lot. In a lot of different forums. So it's always good for us to, you know and represent what we're hearing from the social equity working group in those communications.
Okay. Expect some letters.
Okay. Do we have any comments from the public, clerk?
Thank you. I have one public commenter, the original draw. Please go ahead.
It's interesting to hear you talking about a San Ysidro mobility hub with all of the influx and the illegals there. But, you know, I'm wondering how many of you guys know that the FBI was questioning contracts and finance staff a couple weeks ago. Because that's something that's been hidden from people on the board and other committees. And when we're talking about a $1.3 billion budget, and there's a CFO, Andre, who is totally incompetent, negligent, and mismanages funds and doesn't do his job, you know, and that's why the toll system is in the condition is that it's in. It's never, ever been something that worked right. And instead of, you know, taking the time to make sure that the back office and all of the things were in place, nobody wanted to do that. And it got pushed forward. And all of this stuff has been swept under the rug. There had to be a whistleblower that came forward to even bring light to this. And even since then, Andre has been trying to hide things and say that it's fixed when in fact it isn't. So, you know, when we're dealing with $1.3 billion, the first thing that needs to happen is Andre needs to go. He has to be fired.
Time expired. That concludes the public comments.
Thank you, Tessa. And thank you, Susan, for the presentation. Okay, our final presentation on today's agenda is on the 2025 Regional Transportation Improvement Program, which I think will be a very nice segue from hearing about the budget to now talking about this. So we are going to have Richard Radcliffe from SANDAG present to us today. Hello, and thank you, Richard.
Thank you, Paula, and good morning, members of the Social Equity Working Group. My name is Richard Radcliffe. Sorry, let me put my name card up here. And I am a financial analyst on the financial programming team here at SANDAG. I'm here today to share with you the development schedule and process for the 2025 Regional Transportation Improvement Program, or RTIP. Okay, so this first slide here is one that we have previously used in the orientation of new SANDAG board members. It helps to illustrate the differences between the SANDAG regional plan, the RTIP, and the SANDAG budget. The regional plan, as most of you probably know, is the long-range plan that looks out 20 plus years into the future, whereas the RTIP is the short-range document used to implement the regional plan. In other words, it only looks at the first 5 years of the regional plan. The regional plan gets updated every 4 years, while the RTIP is updated every 2 years. And then the SANDAG budget informs the RTIP. We put projects in the budget and then program them in the RTIP. The budget is updated annually and looks at the next 10 years. This slide here is, again, a summary of the differences between the regional plan and the RTIP. There's a couple more differences between the two, in addition to how often the documents are updated, which is that the regional plan is pretty general when it comes to project descriptions and information, while the RTIP has much more detailed information for each project. And this is because it is used as the main planning tool for the funding of the projects in the program and in the regional plan. So what is the RTIP? The answer is it's a 5-year program that implements the near-term projects in the regional plan. It's a listing of transportation projects that are considered regionally significant, meaning that they are major projects identified in the Transnet ordinance, or they are funded with Transnet dollars. It includes projects from Caltrans and SANDAG, the transit agencies, and all member agencies, including the 18 cities and the county, in addition to tribal areas and some other local agencies which receive transportation funds. The program is required to help the region attain air quality goals and conformity with federal air quality regulations and state implementation plans. To assess air quality, projects in the RTIP are classified as either capacity increasing or non-capacity increasing. In 2012, the Moving Ahead for Progress in the 21st Century Act, or MAP 21, was signed into law. MAP 21 established a performance and outcome-based program in which states invest resources in projects to achieve individual targets that collectively make progress toward national goals. Safety, infrastructure condition, and congestion reduction are the three main performance measures. The RTIP is a federal requirement mandated by Part 450 of the Federal Planning Regulations, and as the MPO for the region, SANDAG is required to develop the program. It must include all federal and state-funded transportation projects in the region. It's required to be updated every 4 years. However, California updates their TIP every 2 years. A final requirement is that the RTIP is financially constrained by fiscal year, which basically means that there is sufficient revenue to fund the expenditures shown in each year. State and federal funds must be in the approved 5-year period of the RTIP in order to be accessed for expenditures. In addition to federal requirements, the Transnet Ordinance and Board Policy Number 31 require that all Transnet-funded projects, called the Transnet Program of Projects, must be programmed in the RTIP. This serves as a mechanism whereby payments cannot be made unless the funds have been programmed. Okay, so now we're going to move on to the 2025 RTIP update. On February 14th, SANDAG staff held a workshop for the local agencies to coordinate with them on the development of the 2025 RTIP. Since then, agencies have been entering their projects, and they have also been scheduling their council meetings and public hearings. As you can see on the calendar shown here, the draft 2025 RTIP project list will be ready for review by the Transnet Independent Taxpayer Oversight Committee, or ITOC, at their May 8th meeting. For those of you who are not familiar with the ITOC Transnet ITOC aids in the implementation of the Transnet program. The Transnet program is administered by SANDAG and is outlined in the Transnet Ordinance and Expenditure Plan. The ITOC provides an increased level of accountability for expenditure of the Transnet funds. With the passage of the Transnet Extension Ordinance and Expenditure Plan in November 2004, otherwise known as Proposition A, it was mandated in the ordinance that an independent taxpayer oversight committee be formed for Transnet to provide the enhanced accountability for the expenditures. The ITOC helps ensure that all voter mandates are carried out as required and develops recommendations for improvements to the financial integrity and performance of the Transnet program. Going back to the dates, July 1st of this year, we have given that as a due date to local jurisdictions to provide us with their signed council resolutions approving their program of Transnet projects for the upcoming RTIP. On July 10th, the ITOC will review the draft 2025 RTIP, including the actual draft RTIP document itself. And then on July 26th, the SANDAG board will be asked to release the draft 2025 RTIP for a 30-day public comment period. Then September 13th will be the public hearing on the 2025 RTIP, which will be held at that board meeting. And I apologize, I see that the note for the 913 there says that the Transportation Committee will hold the public hearing. And that's how we used to do it, but with the 2023 RTIP and with the 2025 RTIP, it will be the board meeting where the public hearing is held. And then on September 27th, the SANDAG board will be asked to adopt the 2025 RTIP and the air quality analysis. So you might be asking yourselves, what goes into the RTIP? And the answer is, again, any projects with federal, state, or Transnet funds get programmed in the RTIP. And in case you're wondering what programming is, it's a process required by federal law that requires that projects need to be included in a transportation improvement program, or TIP. As I mentioned earlier, this is necessary in order for funds to be accessed for expenditures. I won't read all of these, but these are some of the types of projects that can be found in the RTIP. And these include projects that are funded with federal, state, local, and Transnet funds. We have regional plan projects, including capacity increasing and regional arterial projects. We have operational improvements such as traffic calming, traffic signals and streetlights, safety projects, operating and maintenance projects, which include pavement and bridge rehab, drainage improvements, and transit ops and maintenance. And I won't spend too much time on this slide because it's more of a reminder of how the RTIP relates to the SANDAG regional plan. I guess I would just emphasize that you should remember that the RTIP implements the projects in the first 5 years of the regional plan. And in this case, the 2025 RTIP will cover fiscal years 2025 through 2029. So how do projects get into the RTIP? First, projects are conceptualized, then they are planned, and then they are added to the SANDAG program budget. Projects must be approved by a SANDAG board action before they can actually be programmed in the RTIP. Projects that are sponsored by the local agencies, the transit agencies, and by the state are also added to the RTIP following approval by these entities. Now, onto what is probably the most important question for this group, which is how and when can you get involved with the RTIP process? The answer is that there is a number of opportunities to get involved. The RTIP gets updated every 2 years and is amended quarterly. A public hearing is held every 2 years for the RTIP updates, and then amendments to the RTIP are posted for public comment on the SANDAG website. The best place to start as a member of the public, though, is at the local community level. SANDAG does not select the projects that are submitted for inclusion in the RTIP by the local agencies. The project selection happens at the community level, and local agencies will select their eligible projects and then submit them to SANDAG. We strongly encourage getting involved at this stage, so you may have a say in what projects ultimately get included in the RTIP. The local jurisdictions have already started scheduling their public hearings for the 2025 RTIP, and as you can see from this list, most of the agencies have already provided us with their meeting dates, with 4 agencies it looks like that are still TBD. Again, we strongly encourage public participation at these meetings since they are a great way and a great opportunity to provide comments and feedback on specific projects that will be implemented in your community. For more information regarding the exact meeting times and locations, please visit your community's website. This slide here shows an example of what a project will look like in the RTIP. Just move through some of these animations. But if you want to follow me from clockwise from the top left, the project description field is probably one of the most relevant fields to this group since it includes the project limits and the location in the description. And then next in the top right, we have the page number, which is where you can find the project in the regional plan. And then you have the funding that is listed and shown with totals by phase. And then you have the funding summarized by fiscal year and then totals for the funding on the project. And then after this meeting, within the next few weeks, a draft project list that will be separated out by the different jurisdictions will be shared with the group as soon as they're available. When we presented the 2023 RTIP update information to this group a couple years ago, we were going off of a commitment that we made to provide an equity analysis for that RTIP and continuing on with subsequent RTIP cycles. Our team reviewed what other agencies had done for their TIPs and reviewed the literature to develop a methodology that can be implemented with the data that's available to us. The regional plan measures projected access to the 2050 transportation network for disadvantaged populations such as low-income minorities and seniors. The plan for the 2025 RTIP is to do an investment analysis based on project locations and whether they fall within disadvantaged communities via CalEnviro screen census tract scores. This will tell us whether investments included in the RTIP in areas with vulnerable populations are at least equivalent to the percentage of that population. We will do this based on the mapping information that is included in the project submittals from the agencies. We are currently doing an analysis on the 23 RTIP to provide a baseline, and then once all of the projects for the 2025 RTIP update are reviewed and accepted, we will conduct the same analysis on that 2025 RTIP data, which should provide the beginning of a trend analysis. There are other considerations besides where a project is located that help to determine whether it is a benefit or detriment to vulnerable populations. To determine this, we needed more information that we had not been collecting previously. With the 2025 RTIP, we've added 3 additional questions to the project submission form, making it a total of 5 questions. And I will share the 3 questions on the next slide. The responses to these questions we're hoping will help us determine how much the project sponsors understand about the equity of their projects and where they are at in applying equity principles to project selection. We're hoping that this information will lead to a more nuanced analysis in future RTIP cycles. So here are the 3 new questions that we're asking them to complete when they're submitting their projects. First one, as a result of this project's improvements, what benefits are anticipated for SANDAG's priority populations? In other words, minorities, low-income populations, and seniors. Next one is, as a result of this project's construction or implementation, how many housing units, businesses, and or jobs will be displaced, either temporarily or permanently? And finally, as a result of this project's construction or implementation, how many acres of parks, open space, and other public facilities will be converted to transportation uses? And that just about concludes my presentation. I want to thank you all for giving me some of your time this morning. For more information on the 2025 RTIP or the development process, you can visit the RTIP webpage where the link is provided there. You can also visit the public-facing RTIP database with the second link, and that will allow you to see pending RTIP amendments and adoptions that are currently in progress. The screenshot there in the middle of this slide shows what the database from the public-facing side looks like. And from there, you can view the current federally approved 2023 RTIP, again, current RTIP amendments, and you can even search for projects. My email address has also been provided there in case any of you would like to reach out to me directly. Thanks again, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Richard. And he did not say this, but I will just share that the social equity analysis will come back to this group once we have all those projects and are able to look at that. Because I know many of you were involved in 2023. Jesse.
Yeah, thank you for the presentation. I just have some quick questions. So towards the end, right, you mentioned social equity analysis. So I was just wondering, those 3 questions that were shared towards the end, like, are those part of the RTIP kind of like criteria, or like who are those questions addressed to? Is it like part of like the process to get the project in the RTIP, or how does it work?
So basically how it was, so the 2023 RTIP, if we go back a couple of years, that was the first iteration of the RTIP where we conducted a social equity analysis. And at that time, we had 2 sort of general vague-ish kind of questions that basically one was, has a Title VI analysis been performed? Yes and no were the options. And then the second question was something along the lines of what demographics are expected to be impacted, and it was a list of, you know, low income, seniors, things of that nature, but then an all of the above. And we seem to get a lot of all of the above responses. So we're hoping that these 3 questions will help give us a little more detail, a little more context. They're not part of the required information that's required for an RTIP submittal of a project. This is not a federally mandated thing yet, the social equity analysis. There's just a number of agencies that do this as part of their TIP update. So we're still developing this. And again, this is the second iteration. So we're hoping that when agencies are submitting each of their projects, there's a way for them within each individual project for them to provide responses to these questions. And we've made it where they can provide open-ended answers to these 3 questions. So they can provide as much detail as they can, which we can then have our vendor ideally pull as provide us as like a report so we can kind of inform our analysis a little better with additional detail. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, it does. So I guess from the sounds of it, it just sounds like it's more of a like data collection tool rather than like having any kind of like impact on like funding. And from the sounds of it too, since like these dollars are coming from like the state and like the Fed, I'm guessing it would be hard to kind of implement like some kind of mechanism to use these questions to like as a kind of like funding criteria.
Yeah,
I'm guessing.
yeah. So basically, again, I think there's 2 or 3 other MPOs, agencies like ours in the state that currently do this. So it was even difficult for us to try to find agencies that have done similar analyses that we could use as a reference to develop ours. So we're still figuring out the best way to get the most accurate data. And again, this is kind of one of those efforts. We do have the ability to expand these questions kind of at will. I will say too that we're kind of discussing adding an additional layer potentially to the, in addition to the location data that we are able to get from the mapping information that we get from the project. We call them project sponsors. Those are the people at the agencies that enter the projects. So again, it's kind of a work in progress, but we're hoping that we will improve this one over the 2023 RTIP equity analysis.
Thank you.
Claire?
Thank you. Thank you for this presentation. It's always helpful to get a reminder of the process. But kind of building off of Jesse's questions, can you provide some more clarity around like, you know, so each individual agency basically comes up with projects and there's community input, but are those agencies guaranteed that money to implement those projects? Or I'm just trying to figure out like, how are we prioritizing projects in disinvested communities? And so if these are more like data points rather than criteria, then we're not necessarily like funneling more money into communities that haven't been funded previously. So I'm just kind of trying to understand a little bit better, like, how do we get, how do we right past wrongs, right? It's more than having a percentage, having the population percentage being equal to the investment. There should be more investment in communities to right those past wrongs. So just trying to understand that a little bit more, if that's even an option within this, or if the way that it's set up is there's already funding designated to different communities, and we're just trying to make them, we're just trying to get a better understanding of what their equity implications are, if that makes sense.
Sure. So I'll try to give you 2 or 3 things that, or things to consider that would probably answer your question. So again, we encourage you to go to your respective jurisdictions to try and get involved there. And, when they're holding their public hearings on their proposed program of projects, that's ideally the best place to start pushing them to focus their planning efforts at the jurisdictional level on projects that you as a community member would like to see more of, or less of in that case. Basically how it works is, again, federal funding must be programmed in the RTIP. So if a local agency project is receiving a federal grant award, that's federal funding, then we would need to program it in our RTIP. State funding, it doesn't always need to be programmed. We typically do program like 80 to 90% of state funded projects. But going back to how it works with the agencies getting their funding, the local jurisdictions primarily get the Transnet local streets funding, which is basically forecasted on an annual basis that they are given an allocation So like as an example, with this 2025 RTIP, we provided every jurisdiction with, based on sales receipts and a number of other factors, their fiscal years 25 through 29 LSI revenue estimates, and LSI is the Local Streets Improvements Fund, the Transnet money. So they basically are able to program at their discretion by fiscal year up to whatever their amount is. And that is spread across however many projects that they have. So like Del Mar, they have 3 projects this go around in the RTIP, but City of San Diego will have over a dozen. So it kind of varies by jurisdiction. And again, that's kind of why I emphasize, going and getting involved at that level, because when you suggest or, oppose or support projects at that level, that helps inform how they should allocate or reallocate their Transnet funding that's going to be coming to them. And then when they submit projects to us, we basically make sure that they follow the rules based on the Transnet ordinance, that they're classified appropriately and they're according to federal requirements and RTIP requirements. But the programming of the projects in the RTIP and the commitment of the dollars on those projects in our RTIP allows them to access that money for those efforts on those projects. Does that make sense? Does that answer your question?
It does. Thank you. I think it
Kind of a
mostly
lot.
does. And so then I just to keep pushing a little bit. So basically there's some sort of formula for the allocation of how money goes into different communities. And so like in our communities, like we are a disinvested community. So I can go to city council and I can push for projects that are to support our community that's already been disinvested. And so I'm curious. So if that's my only lever for impacting the projects in my community, and I imagine this is this is a bigger conversation, right? But I'm just thinking about Transnet dollars, right? Like, how do we get more Transnet dollars into our communities? And I imagine that sounds like there's an ordinance and there's like many layers to that. And so then I'm curious if there's
More sales receipts.
more sales or
That's one key.
right. So then
metric.
so how do we change that so that we can get more of those resources? And that's probably not an answer that you have, but just to like propose to all of us, is like, how do we get more of those resources to our communities? And I'm not expecting an answer, but just as like I think we need to be questioning how Transnet funding is allocated.
Maybe Susan could answer that question better than I could.
So in chapter 4 of the budget, you going back to the prior item, if you go to chapter 4 of the budget, it is the Transnet chapter. And so it will give you details about our anticipated revenue that's coming in. It also provides a flow of funds chart, which was approved by the voters essentially when the money comes in, how it flows out. And so if you wanted more of that revenue that comes in to go into the local streets and roads, then we would have to change that flow of funds chart, which is that would be an ordinance amendment. That would take either a vote of the people or it would take 2/3 of our board to change the flow of funds.
Thank you. I appreciate more information about it. Just trying to figure out, right, the money's where the power is at. So just trying to, if we have a better understanding of how it's flowing and where the decisions are being made, then we're able to advocate better for our community. So I don't mean to make you uncomfortable, but I appreciate the information.
So roughly in the ordinance, it's about a third. A third goes to the local jurisdictions. A third goes either for operations or capital to the transit operators. And then a third goes to the major corridor program and the EMP program that supports it. And then, there's a little bit of tweaks, but it's roughly a third. So a third of the money that comes in goes through to the local streets and roads programs or are available through some of the grant programs like Ali and Zach were just talking about that the local jurisdictions can apply for projects within their communities.
Hi, thank you for your presentation. I just have a few questions to make sure I understand the process as we engage with it. First, so can you clarify what projects need to go into the RTIP? Is it just Transnet funded projects or it's that and more?
So it's Transnet funded projects because the Transnet ordinance requires it, but it's also because the commitment of the money in the RTIP allows the agencies to draw that money and use it for their projects, but also from the federal level, federal funding needs to be programmed in the RTIP. So if we have a federal grant or any like federal FTA or FHWA dollars that are coming in, those need to be committed and reflected in the RTIP. And then there's a number of state fund sources that also require that.
Okay, but there are projects that are in the regional plan that are not necessarily in the RTIP that will still be implemented.
Right.
Okay, and then, thank you. And then I know the jurisdictions submit their priorities. How does it work for capital or operational projects that are across multiple jurisdictions? Do they have to agree? How are they prioritized?
Yeah, I think there's usually agreements that kind of happen behind the scenes. Typically, we have a lot of projects that we program in the RTIP that are, as an example, like collaborations between us and Caltrans. The implementing agency, sometimes is different than, it might be programmed on a SANDAG RTIP ID number, but it might be a different implementing agency. The transit agencies, they will approve their upcoming, program of projects for inclusion in our RTIP, and that's based off of the federal funding that they're expecting.
Okay, so SANDAG doesn't necessarily go through like selecting projects, it's just whatever the jurisdiction chose goes?
Well, they select them at the jurisdictional level, or the transit agencies would prioritize or select their projects at their level and then get them approved by their board. And then they submit them to us for inclusion in the RTIP. And then as long as they meet the requirements that we need to have them meet in order for the inclusion in the RTIP, then we accept them and they're programmed in the RTIP.
Okay, thank you.
How's the money divided among the jurisdictions? Is it by population? I understand a third goes to different things, but how does it go to the jurisdictions?
Let me look that up for you. I believe that it is related to population. There may be a component of lane miles. So let me look that up for you as we're sitting here.
And hear you guys that there was no money set aside for like emergencies or things that happen like the flood in our community?
They're not that I currently know of, but once things get into the RTIP, everything's kind of already baked in at that point. Again, we can't program things in the RTIP unless they're, like I have to wait basically for the FY25 budget to be approved before I can program any of those projects in the upcoming RTIP because we require a board action in order to commit those dollars. Basically, the RTIP is a document that reflects the commitment of the money on whichever projects are prioritized.
I'm familiar with RTIP. I'm just that from an organization that sounds risky. Because there are going to be disasters, and
I think you misunderstood my comment, Barry. So we don't have money set aside for like emergencies like you were talking about with the flooding. Certainly we have contingency that's built into projects and funding that is available for, unforeseen circumstances with our projects, but
just needed that to be clarified.
Hi, thank you again for your presentation. And I'm sorry to belabor this question, but I think I'm on the same page as others that are confused, I guess, as to how and what projects get included So it sounds like the projects that jurisdictions select, are they already being funded? And then that increases their likelihood of being included in the RTIP? Or are they additional projects that the jurisdictions would like to have funded by being included in the RTIP?
They could be both.
Okay.
With every RTIP update, basically every 2 years, we do see a number of new projects being added. Basically how it works is if a project does not have, so this RTIP will look at basically the 5 years between fiscal year 2025 and 2029. So if an agency does not foresee any funding being committed in that 5-year period, then usually we will not carry it over to the next RTIP version, which doesn't mean that the project is gone or it goes away. It just doesn't have money in the current 5 years. And basically the state will usually kick the project back to us and say, hey, we don't want to see this, you know. But basically an agency could decide that, you know, they no longer need an on-ramp or a lane here. And so they delay the project or kind of put it to the side, and then they decide to add a new one. And again, as long as it meets the requirements and they have provided, you know, the sufficient details and everything for us, then it can be included. And as long as it meets the requirements of the Transnet ordinance, then they can use Transnet funding on it.
Can I just go back real quick to your question on the local streets and roads program? Okay, so local streets and road program funds are allocated based on $50,000 to each jurisdiction, and the balance allocated by a formula based on 2/3 of the population data published by the State of California Department of Finance and 1/3 on miles of maintained roads published by Caltrans. Yes.
Other comments or questions for Richard?
I guess I'm just a little surprised that we didn't have an equity analysis before. So thank you for starting that in 2023. I'm hoping that it sets a precedence for the state and so that the state starts mandating some of these questions. But I just wanted to say thank you for being proactive about it.
We're kind of expecting it at some point.
Yeah, I anticipate as well.
Okay, thank you, Richard and Susan. Are there any public comments on this item, Tessa?
Thank you. We have one public commenter, the original draw. Please go ahead.
You know, with this being a gas tax and the push to phase out gas cars, you know, eventually this funding is no longer going to be there. And I don't see any, you know, work done to try and figure out what to do after that fact, to provide what needs to be provided for the people. And I think it would behoove you guys to listen to what CARB is saying, especially because as we push for electric vehicles, you know, the state knows that it's not really possible right now. It's not something that's going to be implemented quick enough. And so they're starting to look at hydrogen, but there aren't even any vehicles that can use that. So it's still putting people in a really bad place of needing a new car either way, which is a total disservice to the people because right now they're using gas cars and it's funding all of this infrastructure to get them out of that type of a vehicle. And, you know, all of these other vehicles cost twice as much or more, and they don't go as far as you already know. So this is really detrimental to people's transportation.
Your time expired. That concludes the public comments.
Thank you very much. That brings us to the end of our meeting. Our next meeting is scheduled for Thursday, April 25th, here in these offices at 9:30 a.m. And we will see you then. We're adjourned at 11:31.